Well, listeners, in case you didn't get enough sports today, here's an ad break that'll tell you how to watch even more sports. YouTube is the new home of NFL Sunday Ticket. And if you sign up now, you'll get our lowest full season price of the year. Just go to youtube.com/presale to get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket. Watch your favorite teams out-of-market Sunday afternoon games, exclusively on YouTube and YouTube TV. All right, enough about sports. Go get more sports. Terms and embargoes apply. Offer ends June 6th. No refunds.
Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States. And in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from The Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
What a late Thursday night / Friday morning, but that's what happens when you're on the board at number 28. The Bengals don't trade up or down. They stay put right where they were, and they get Myles Murphy, the edge rusher out of Clemson, breaking a 20-plus year precedent of not taking a defensive lineman in the first round. But here we are, breaking it down for you. Welcome into a special post-draft podcast edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad, Mike Nislik, and Andrew Gillis burning that oil after hours at approximately 1:30 a.m. on this Friday. So obviously it's been a late night for everyone. So we will keep this as thorough and tight as possible for tonight. But I mean, guys, we talked about, will the Bengals buck history and, do something they haven't done really since 2001. That's how long it's been since they got a D lineman that early. I mean, when you saw the Bengals were on the clock and you knew it was going to come down to him, Michael Mayer, Nolan Smith, and amazingly Joey Porter Jr., I mean, did you guys think in your all's minds that Murphy was the guy? Like, were you just right then and there, like, that's who they need to get?
Well, I think early on, you kind of started to get the sense that things could get a little weird. Jahmyr Gibbs, I mean, the Lions played a big part in this. So, Jahmyr Gibbs going 12th, I don't think anybody saw that. I think we had this debate on the pod. Do you take Jahmyr Gibbs if he's there at 28? That is where things kind of started to turn. Darnell Wright goes 10th. That was a little bit earlier. So things started to change a little bit. Will McDonald went earlier than some people thought. Jack Campbell sneaks into the top 20 when nobody really thought that was possible. So, Mozzie Smith, 26. You start to get down the list. And, I mean, they had some really good names on the board and names that we talked about. We obviously mentioned Myles Murphy before they took him. And we also mentioned Brzee. We mentioned Michael Mayer. He wasn't picked. It just – to me, as you got closer to it, there were like 3 options, maybe 4, actually probably 4 options: Murphy, Brzee, Mayer, and Joey Porter Jr. And you need a pass rush. We talked about this on the pod that their pass rush was not good enough last season, and now you go get a guy who's young, who's coming out of college with kind of room to grow and room to kind of develop. So. Yeah, I think that this was kind of a nice situation for the Bengals. You get, a player that, frankly, I didn't think was going to be there. I think Mike kind of mentioned that on the other pod that, he didn't think Murphy was going to be around, and he was, and the Bengals made that pick. So, yeah, I thought it was a really good pick. But, when you get to like 20, 24 and you can start to kind of whittle down the names, you could kind of get a sense that there was going to be somebody there that they liked.
Well, the best thing that probably happened to him was the Lions taking Campbell and then the run on receivers. That probably, because I look back on it when I was writing today, and basically after McDonald was taken, Myles Murphy and Nolan Smith, probably depended on the board, were the next pass rusher up. So essentially, if somebody was interested, he would have been the guy. And so, I think Zach Taylor kind of said they were kind of sweating there when it got down to it because, there's about 13 picks there between that, and that I think that was a long stretch, especially for a pass rusher. When a lot of those guys I think that were impact guys already off the board, and there was only a couple left. So I think it kind of developed perfectly for them. I thought there was only a few scenarios where, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe, they were saying that they weren't going to necessarily draft a tight end, but that they would pass up on Mayer just because he seemed like the perfect fit. And this was one of them. I thought Myles Murphy was a terrific fit for this team the entire time, a guy that could rush off the edge and lose system, that had kind of freak athleticism. His testing got delayed, and that might have helped the Bengals. I'm not really sure, how that played a role in kind of his thing. He was dealing with a hamstring injury, couldn't test at the combine, only did the bench press, couldn't test at Clemson's original pro day, had to reschedule it later. So, everything kind of worked out for them. Didn't have to trade up to get a talent that at one time, was talked about as a top 10 pick. And there was nothing that really kind of came up in the draft process that would really alter that evaluation, other than people getting, maybe more information on other guys and they like him more. But, I don't think Murphy was any different of a player than he was 3 months ago when he had that evaluation.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned Will McDonald. Like, I was shocked that the Jets drafted him that high. I thought he was at best late first round pick, kind of like Nolan Smith who went to the Eagles, or the Chiefs who got Felix and Adike Uzama. I kind of saw it like that. I mean, Mozzie Smith was probably one of the biggest head scratchers. Nothing against him, but I don't know. As much as the Cowboys were high on him, I don't know why they would be when the guy basically had half a sack last season. Not really sure what they saw with him, but you kind of got the sense of okay, Jack Campbell goes to the Lions, Jahmyr Gibbs goes to the Lions, Darnell Wright, like Andrew mentioned, top 10 pick. I did not see that coming. I was honestly thinking at one point that Kalijah Kancey was going to slide down, but Tampa Bay said, "Oh, we're going to take that," and you had that string of wide receivers, from picks 19, 20 through 24, and those picks really opened up the door for the Bengals at that point, and I think that's really where, like Zach Taylor said, they didn't expect them to be in that situation, but they took advantage of it, and you could hear Lou Anarumo talk, and this is the big thing, I think, where Murphy makes a difference. You're dealing with Patrick Mahomes next year. You're dealing with Josh Allen next year, and you're going to deal with C.J. Stroud next year, who's going to be with the Houston Texans, and Anthony Richardson. We'll see what those guys look like. They could be win-now players. Like, you got to deal with those guys. And, of course, corners helps, and we'll see what happens in the second round. We'll worry about that tomorrow. But, I mean, when you get a guy like Murphy and insert him into that rotation with Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, for a guy like that who's a 3-down, edge rusher, what's the difference between the Bengals pass rush last year and what you could see them elevating to, next season?
Well, one of the things that we had debated on this podcast for frankly months was kind of, the short-term, long-term debate. I was kind of in the mold of, hey, I think you can get a player who can help you in the long term, and it's okay if that's the case. If you have to draft for a year in advance, but he's the highest player on your board, that's okay. And Mike kind of made the case that, look, you need somebody that can help you right now. And I actually think Murphy kind of fills both needs, because you look at the pass rush last year. Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, 8 sacks and 6.5 sacks respectively, which is fine for your starting tandem. Especially considering that they're really strong in terms of win rates and things like that, and kind of how they defend the run and how they just kind of play the position as a whole. But the next leading sack getter was Joseph Osai, and he had 3.5. So, I mean, your top 2 sack leaders, they combined for 14.5 of the 30 that you had across 16 games. So, that to me, that's not good enough. And I mean, clearly they ranked 29th in the league. You needed some kind of boost. So, I think that number is going to go up, because if you can get kind of similar production from Hendrickson and Hubbard, you kind of add another player who can rush in a spot, can maybe come in on third downs. You add another pass rusher there. If Osai continues to develop, you feel better about that. So I think, at the very least in the short term, you add a guy who's going to help that, who's going to benefit from kind of playing behind 2 guys like Hendrickson and Hubbard. You can rotate him in. I mean, Hendrickson and Hubbard, they didn't get through a full season last year, and it's just really hard to play 17 games in the NFL. So if they have to miss a week, you're probably going to feel pretty decent about putting Murphy in there. So, yeah, I think, the depth right now is better than it was. If you kind of look at, where the defensive line group was last season compared to this season, now you have Myles Murphy, you have a potential starter kind of down the line, or someone that you would envision would be a starter down the line. And I actually think it kind of fills both needs, where you get an immediate help into the rotation, but kind of long term, you get a starter.
Yeah, I think you got to have sensible expectations for him next year, but it's more about how he compares to the guys that he would be replacing. And I think you've seen, I wrote that I think it's 7 draft picks the last 3 years for the Bengals on the defensive line, and the production's not been there from that group. This second team offensive line has just not been consistent. And so whenever Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson and DJ Reader kind of go off the field, this is just not an effective group. And so I think Murphy sort of elevates that, will maybe make Hubbard and Hendrickson even all that better so they can kind of mix and match and give some guys some extra time off without having to sacrifice production. But I think you just have to have modest expectations in terms of production for Murphy, but I do think he will be better than the guys that he's sort of bumping down the depth chart. And so I think that's where it all kind of comes together. I do think he will be effective. He'll have ups and downs as a rookie, but I think this is an upgrade over what they had with that second team defensive line.
Yeah, and to go back to a point that Muhammad made a few minutes ago, I'm going to have a story about this for our website here tomorrow, and I guess tomorrow technically being today because it's already Friday. You look at what happened in the rest of the AFC today. It's a loaded AFC. It's a really talented AFC. Teams are trying to throw the ball. You get the Steelers. They help protect Kenny Pickett a little bit, but you have the AFC North with the Steelers. The Ravens added Zay Flowers. They gave Lamar a long-term deal. Like, the Ravens did not sign OBJ and draft Zay Flowers to run the ball like they did. The Browns did not trade for Elijah Moore to run the ball with Nick Chubb 500 times a game. Like, they're going to throw the ball, and Deshaun would assumingly get better. So you got the AFC North, like Muhammad said. C.J. Stroud goes to Houston. He's on the schedule. Anthony Richardson goes to Indy. He's on the schedule. The Rams, who knows what's going on with them. Seattle, Geno Smith was pretty good last year. Kyler Murray, Trevor Lawrence, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Kirk Cousins, and that offense with Justin Jefferson. Like, there's some really talented offenses that are on this schedule, and obviously you're not drafting for that schedule. But I just think you kind of look at it and say, there are a lot of teams with really good quarterbacks, and especially in the AFC now. The AFC's loaded at quarterback and at receiver, and you've got to be able to get after the quarterback. You've got to be able to kind of cause havoc because it's not just can you get after the quarterback, because a quarterback you can get rid of the ball in 2 seconds and your defensive line is mitigated, or the rush is mitigated, but you got to have some kind of ability to make life difficult for them. And I think that's kind of what this helps you do. You look at the AFC Championship game last year. They really didn't put a ton of pressure on Mahomes, I didn't think. So, yeah, this is just one of those things where you look at what's kind of happening across the league, and adding a pass rusher is certainly not the worst thing in the world.
To that point, Andrew, there's a point, I think Zach Taylor said this either this week or last week when they resumed, voluntary workouts. And he was saying that a lot of times, no, I think he said it this week because he was talking about kind of the pre-draft sort of plan they had. For some teams, their best player is a defensive end. And, look at the Browns. Look at Myles Garrett. Like, he's their best player. No disrespect to Deshaun Watson or anyone else on that team. They have some really, really loaded guys. Like, there's a reason why I think the Browns will be an interesting team. But, like, Myles Garrett has given the Bengals the most problems when they've played in the Joe Burrow era. Other teams could probably say the same thing. I think Myles Murphy won't come out the gate and be a Myles Garrett in terms of just production. Like, Mike said, you have to have reasonable standards. But it's to a point where, like, the defensive end position is becoming more and more critical to have and more critical to plan against. So, like, yeah, if you're Patrick Mahomes and you're Josh Allen, these guys, you got to look out for all those names you mentioned, including Myles Murphy. The opposite is true. The Bengals realize that, like, there is a lot of value in a defensive end. There is a lot of value in an edge rusher. And I think that's why, like, which is how much it's changed in the last couple of years. This goes back to the strategy that Duke Tobin had of, getting the best player available versus filling a need. Because you could say, oh, they really need a tight end. You can't trust Irv Smith and Drew Sample long term. Go with Michael Mayer. They didn't do that. They went with the best player that was there, and I think that best player was Myles Murphy. Do you think, obviously we know they made a good pick, but, like, do you think that approach really worked where it was like, drafting the best player available versus drafting for need? Do you think that's what really worked out in this case?
I mean, they did both, right? I mean, they needed a defensive end. I mean, we all said they needed pass rush, so I don't think this is sort of ignoring. I think everybody kind of thought tight end, running back, and then defensive line. I think you can debate interior or the edge, but I mean, it boiled down to pass rush or disruption, and you can get those from either spot. They went with the edge rusher, and so you saw how many snaps B.J. Hill was capable of playing last year. You saw how many snaps DJ Reader could play when he was healthy. Hendrickson hasn't done that, and Hubbard I think is a little more capable. But so I mean, I think they wanted a guy that could take quality snaps, and so I don't view it as they might have drafted the best player value, but they drafted need as well, because this was obviously with 30 sacks last year, fourth worst in the league, fourth worst sack per pass attempt. So they just weren't good. So I mean, obviously a need.
Let's say you're in a situation where really it could be two situations. Either Murphy's gone, or the case that we did have where you had Murphy and Brian Bresee, who, funny enough, went right after him to the Saints. I mean, that is a fair question of, do you target the edge or do you target the interior? Do you think it made more sense to target the edge versus the interior? Because you mentioned DJ Reader. He's entering a contract year. BJ Hill had a very heavy workload, and I think that'll catch up to him sooner than, say, Trey Hendrickson. And, like you said, Sam Hubbard, still in his prime. On the tail end of it, obviously, but, production's not a problem for him. Do you think edge rusher made more sense to prioritize over the interior in this case?
I think it was. I think genuinely, I do think Murphy. There are certain situations where a team will say, "Oh, well, he was the highest rated player on our board," and of course they're going to say that. What are they supposed to say? No, we actually had to reach for this guy because we needed a tight end or we needed a tackle or whatever. So I think I actually genuinely believe them when just kind of looking at who Myles Murphy is and kind of what the board is right now. And I think I believe them when they say that Murphy was the highest rated player on their board. So if you consider that, then that makes sense. But also, Reader's going to be a free agent. But again, Trey Hendrickson's going to make he's under contract for 2023 and 2024. In 2024, he's going to make $17.5 million. And if you cut him prior to June 1st, after the 2023 season, you save $15 million and you only have 2.5 in dead cap. Sam Hubbard, he's under contract for 3 more seasons. So again, I think that this kind of puts Hendrickson on an interesting path and an interesting 2023 season, because if you like Myles Murphy, you got to find a way to play him. And I think that it might be more evident that defensive tackle and specifically nose tackle, the position that DJ Reader plays on that line, because they're two different positions, but the position that Reader plays, I think that might be a little bit more noticeable just because his contract is coming up. But you can also get out of Trey Hendrickson's contract really, really easily, actually, after the 2023 season. And I'm not saying get out of his contract as if he's not a stout player, but DJ Reader going into 2023, he's their highest player. He's got the highest cap number on the team. Trey Hendrickson's second. You might be able to get out of both of those dollar figures and kind of move on. So again, I think that if you replace that with some youth, and you can find a pathway to say, okay, this can work. Where at defensive end, it might not be as evident as it was at defensive tackle, if that makes sense.
There's something to be said for the interior. I hope it makes sense. The interior is a harder position to have an impact in year one. I mean, you can give defensive edge rushers very simple packages, see quarterback, get quarterback, and I think it's a little more different for those interior guys, multiple responsibilities with the rush and things. And so I think you can simplify things, not that they will for Murphy, but to get him on the field right away, and I think he had the sort of bigger immediate upside than anybody available in the interior. Probably outside of Jalen Carter. I mean, I really think that this was sort of an easy pick over any of the other defensive sort of tackles at that spot.
It's almost like all the Bengals really had to do. I mean, and I think you guys would agree. You just sit, you watch the, I don't want to say debauchery, that's not the right word, but very interesting situations with other teams, whether it was Jahmyr Gibbs or Jack Campbell or Mozzie Smith. I mean, obviously, they're not biting their nails, but, like, yeah, you're kind of sweating, and you're thinking, like, are we going to get this guy? Are we going to get him? And you do. And so at that point, all you got to do is just have him on your board, feel good about him, make the pick, make the call. But, you mentioned...
We don't know. Like, Mozzie Smith could have been higher rated on their board than Myles Murphy. And it could have been one of those situations where they wanted to go into the interior and Mozzie was gone. And Mozzie's gone, and then Myles Murphy's the next player on your board, and they just kind of weren't assuming that both of them were going to be gone. I don't know. But,
interesting.
I think, like I said, I think that you could start to get a sense early on that this draft was going to leave you. There were some clues early on, specifically when a Darnell Wright goes 10, when Jahmyr Gibbs goes 12, when Will McDonald goes 15. There were some clues kind of about halfway to the Bengals pick that they were going to have some options there that they really liked.
It's interesting. I don't know. It could be the case. I don't know that you would put Mozzie Smith over Myles Murphy, but maybe they see something I don't.
Maybe
because
I don't know. Yeah.
Obviously, somebody did.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, and I question why the Cowboys were so happy with that. I'd like to see how that plays out because, yeah, I was shocked like a lot of people. But just to kind of wrap up here, since it is a very late night, as I mentioned, we are going into rounds 2 and 3 on Friday night. So we'll see, presumably, at least 2 more picks unless the Bengals trade up or down or do anything fancy, which they could. Historically, they've done that, especially in recent years. At least every other year they've done, something with trading up or down in the second round. We talked about kind of an ideal first round situation. I think we could all agree it was an ideal first round. What would an ideal second and or third round look like for the Bengals on Friday night?
Well, I've been kind of beating the drum that, it should be best player available, but kind of looking at what's available, I'm pretty surprised that Michael Mayer lasted through the end of the first round. I think that if we had this podcast, whenever, and I had, come to you guys and I said, hey, I know for a fact that, Michael Mayer is going to be available at 28. We would have probably said, all right, yeah, that probably seems right for the Bengals, and that seems like the right pick, and that seems like a pick they'd make. But only one tight end went, and everybody talks about how great this tight end class is, and there's a lot of names that you've kind of heard thrown around. Obviously, Mayer is going to go, I would assume, round 2. Luke Musgrave is going to go, Darnell Washington, Sam Laporta. You can kind of run down the line of tight ends. So I think a tight end that they like will be there, either in rounds 2 or 3. I think you can also kind of start talking yourself into running back. I know we've talked about Zach Charbonnet a lot, but there are some other guys, Tajay Spears out of Tulane, Israel Abanikanda from Pitt, Devin Achane from Texas A&M. There are guys there that kind of might be round 3 options. So, yeah, I mean, I think, hell, if you get down to the end of the first round and, Keely Ringo is still, end of the second round, and Keely Ringo is still there, or something like that, something crazy where you kind of, how in the world did this guy fall? Or, how is, I'm trying to think of a name, DeJuan Jones. How is DeJuan Jones still available at 60? That I think you can start to talk yourself into. But, I think at some point during this draft, you would need a tight end and you definitely need a running back. And I just kind of think the board is going to line up that way here over the next 2 or 3 rounds.
Well, could it? I mean, you saw the really historical run on receivers. Does that happen with tight ends here? There's a lot of good ones, but there was also, you saw 6 or 7 different teams kind of commonly linked to these top tight ends in the first round, and only one of them drafted a tight end. So, are you going to see all these guys start coming off the board early? Are they going to wait? Are teams going to wait on them, and that gives the Bengals sort of the pick of the litter? Darnell Washington would be a really good player in this system. If Mayer goes sort of early in that second round, Washington's sort of a freak athlete himself. So I think it could go either way. I think you do need to sort of address those holes. In the second round, I will be interested to see if they value running back over tight end or vice versa to see how they have that sort of on their board if they go in that direction, because we've kind of thought that they would at some point address those needs.
Yeah, well, and I think you kind of look at the board with not only the draft, but okay, there are going to be players who, I mean, you're going to find guys who maybe get squeezed out of a job. You know, I talked to you guys about this at the stadium actually. I would start making calls about DeAndre Swift. DeAndre's like I almost forgot their name. It's really late. The Lions drafted Jahmyr Gibbs 12th. He's their starting running back. They signed David Montgomery, and now you have DeAndre Swift. And there was a quote from the Lions GM that I'll pull up. That I don't want to pull up right now, but it was basically to the effect of, "Well, he's on the team right now, and we value him, but we'll see where we're at." So that to me kind of says, if you want him, come get him. And DeAndre Swift is a player that is explosive and it kind of fills a need for you. And you're certainly not going to have to pay a second, a third round pick. And, you're probably paying a 6th or a 7th round pick for that guy at this point, just considering the Lions have no leverage. So there are going to be options like that pop up. And I'm curious to see if that kind of is a factor here, because there are still some talented running backs on the free agent market. Kareem Hunt's still out there. Leonard Fournette and Zeke are still out there. There's not nothing. So I think that the running back position is going to be really interesting to monitor here for rounds 2 and 3. And as you get into 4, 5, and 6.
Well, for those of you who want to continue monitoring everything involving the Bengals in this weekend's draft, what's to come, what has already come, and what that means, make sure you sign up for our Strictly Stripes newsletter. It is the best Bengals newsletter you can get out there. You sign up by going to cleveland.com/newsletters. It's free. It's in your inbox every morning. And make sure you click on the Strictly Stripes newsletter option. And if you want to stay in touch with us, a.k.a. me, Mike, and Andrew, sign up for our Cincinnati Football Insider Subtext service. We have been bringing all of our opinions and insight to our growing base of subscribers before Twitter, before the web, before anybody, because that's the Cool Kids Club. If you want to join the Cool Kids Club, as I like to call it, go to cleveland.com/Bengals, click on the blue banner at the top of the page. It's $4.99 a month, but it's a 2-week free trial to start, which you can cancel anytime. So make sure you sign up because it's a lot of fun. Thanks for staying with us on this late Thursday night/Friday morning. We will do the same thing Friday night/Saturday morning at the end of rounds 2 and 3. But once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Have a good night/good morning.